really excited to introduce our speakers. So first up, we have Karson. Karson is the founder and CEO of Vangst. Now, this is a cannabis, the cannabis industry's recruiting platform is what Vangst is, in case y'all haven't been, familiarized with it. Now, since launching in 2016, Vangst has connected thousands of people with jobs at leading cannabis businesses all around the world. Karson has been featured on the 2018 Forbes 30 Under 30 list, and Vangst was featured in Entrepreneur's 100 Brilliant Companies of 2018. Now, prior to founding Vangst, Karson founded On Track Adventures, a student travel organization based out of St. Lawrence University. So welcome, Karson. We're so happy to have you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yay! Karson's going to be joined by Cristina Lopez Aducci, who is the founder and CEO of House of Puff. House of Puff is a Latina-led and women-owned cannabis lifestyle company based in NYC. Cristina launched House of Puff to help women consume cannabis unapologetically by making it chic and easy. Hailing from the art world, she marries these worlds with art-inspired cannabis products that women can be proud of. She launched a companion editorial site for the brand called thedrawingroom.blog and is the on-air presenter for At Home with House of Puff on YouTube. I am beyond intrigued for this conversation, so I'm really excited to get to sit back seat and listen to y'all talk. I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Karson. I am so excited to talk to you. You have been on my radar and in my network. Every time I'm like, hey, do you know Karson? Do you know Karson? I'm like, I've not had the pleasure. So I'm so excited to talk to you.
Completely right back at you. Like I mentioned, I was meaning to reach out, and then I realized we're on a panel together. So it's perfect.
Love it. Serendipitous. Okay, so we can't wait to pick your brain about successful and inclusive entrepreneurship. So let's start at the very beginning. Tell us, what is Vangst? I know you've been around for about 6 years, and how it's grown since its inception.
By the way, I can already tell you're going to be an amazing interviewer. I love the energy out of the gate here.
I wore my turtleneck.
I did too. It's also because it's freezing in Denver. But yes, so I'm Karson. I started Vangst now 6 years ago, which is making me feel old. But when I'm from Buffalo, New York. I went to school in upstate New York, a small liberal arts school. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, like it was my dream. So I was always trying to start these small companies. And in college, I started a student travel company called On Track Adventures. Won't go down the rabbit hole of what On Track Adventures was, but towards the middle of my senior year, I was like, I do not want to be a party planner for the rest of my life. I need to think of a new business to start when I get out of school. And what does everybody need when they get out of school? Jobs. Everyone seemed to be, kind of doing the same path of, moving to New York and going into marketing or PR or finance. And nobody seemed like overly thrilled about the industries they were going into. And so started asking people, what are industries you would actually be like super excited and interested to work in? And people started saying the cannabis industry, which at the time, cannabis was only legal in Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. So it was not as cool as it is today. I went out to a conference just to start learning about the space, was learning about the different types of businesses that existed, asking the businesses, hey, what roles are you hiring for? What does your staff look like? And quickly realized that cannabis businesses were hiring everything from entry-level bud tenders to directors and management level positions. And when I asked these businesses, hey, how do you go about finding your staff? They, and this was in Colorado, they were like, well, look, number one, there's a special badge, like a regulatory badge that you have to have through the state of Colorado. So there's a limited amount of people with the badge, right? And take away if they're qualified. So they're like, there's not people with a badge. We can't advertise, right? At the time, like they couldn't even post on a place like Indeed because it would have been the equivalent of saying like, come sell crack cocaine, like, it's illegal. So all these jobs are being taken down. They couldn't post on Facebook. So they're like literally hiring and retaining talent is our number one pain point. So really saw an opportunity to, at the time, match interns and recent grads. The original name of the business was Graduana. And I just said, like, I'll help you find an intern or a recent grad for $500, and did that for a while and realized it was, there was a much bigger opportunity, which is when we rebranded to Vangst and yeah.
So where does the name Vangst come from?
Yeah, so Vangst means catch in Dutch. Like I'm like a tiny bit Dutch. I wish there was a better story that goes along with it. Like I mentioned, the name was Graduana. Like if you Google Graduana, it's a graduation cap with a cannabis leaf coming off the side. And our customers were even making fun of us. Like, this is stupid. So we needed to rebrand, but we had, we were totally bootstrapped. I had no money. I spent $5,000 with this branding agency called Cannabrand, kind of like, no offense to them, like a janky, like marketing agency.
Yeah.
Fine. And they said like, yeah, we'll do your rebrand. We'll give you a logo, Squarespace website, and like some marketing materials for $5,000. They gave me 3 options, one of which was Vangst. I was like, that
Sold.
I was like sold. Now I really love it. I don't know if it's actually a good name, but I've just been looking at it every day for the past 6 years. So I love it now, but
I love it.
There wasn't like some like amazing story behind it.
So you started off, and then you had how many team members, and how many team members do you have now?
1. And now we have 65. I think 10 people are starting next week. So we'll be 75 next week. Yeah. So we've grown quite a bit. I mean, it hasn't been like a completely straight up and to the left ride, but I think a lot of it, I think managing a startup throughout COVID was definitely challenging, and I'm sure we'll get into that, but we were bootstrapped for the first 2 years. So it was, basically me and a bunch of other 23-year-olds. And we were actually able to grow the business to about $1.5 million in revenue before ever raising venture capital. And when we decided to raise a seed round, it was because we really wanted to build out a platform so that customers could post a gig and say, I'm looking for a temporary trimmer, and trimmers could build a profile, get the badge, get some training, and match to a gig, clock in and clock out through the platform, get paid through the platform. So we realized, we're going to need to raise some capital to build out this engineering team and this product team. So, but we were completely bootstrapped for the first 2 years. So I know all the challenges of like, can we make payroll next week, and now we've raised about $30 million in total. So we've now.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get to that because that's some exciting news. Going back to the trimmer comment you just made, what are some other specific examples on how Vangst is tailored to the cannabis industry?
Yeah, so it starts out with the badge. Like I mentioned, every state has different badging requirements. And so if you're wanting to work in Nevada, you need to get a different badge. It's what's called an agent card than if you work in Colorado. And so candidates that come onto the Vangst platform, we have partnerships with the state agencies, and we're developing more so that we can actually help candidates originally get badged. This is a benefit for candidates because we can walk them through, anything that has to do with the government is a nightmare of a process. So we can help them streamline getting the badge. And then from the customer's perspective, they're only going to be able to match with candidates that have the badge that makes them compliant for their state. So that's number 1. Number 2, we screen all the candidates. So our customers are only getting access to screen candidates. We're launching training. So as an example, if you're a bud tenders are the gatekeeper between, a brand like yours and the consumer. And so brands like yours can actually have training on their Vangst.com profile so that a bud tender could learn how to sell your product, in a quick and easy way. And then, and then on the bud tender's profile, they would have your logo so that dispensaries can say, I only want to hire bud tenders who know how to sell the brands on my shelf. So those are just some of the ways that we differentiate from, if you post on Indeed and you get 9,000 candidates that don't have the right, literally legal badge, let alone any kind of training or qualifications.
Brilliant. So we're going to talk about the latter offline because now I'm intrigued.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we know that cannabis is becoming more socially accepted, but the cannabis industry still has its distractors. How do you overcome skepticism towards your vision and convince others that this was a good business idea?
Yeah, I definitely think it's gotten easier over the years. Like I mentioned in 2016, when cannabis was only legal in 4 states, like everyone said, the amount of people that said like I was going to ruin my career, never be able to get another job, just like this was a terrible idea. So it definitely wasn't for everybody at the time, but I think that people that took a step back and looked at the macro trends of the reality of the situation of, this is where general popular opinion sits. Like right today, I think 75% of Americans support cannabis legalization. You look, I just read an article that so far cannabis has created $13 billion in tax revenues. Cannabis has the opportunity, and we need to all be doing a better job to really but truly undo a lot of the wrongdoings that the war on drugs has caused and the damages that a lot of communities, particularly the black and brown communities, have faced due to completely unjust cannabis arrest. So cannabis has like an opportunity to truly do good. And then of course the medicinal benefits. So if you can sit down with a relatively rational person and paint them the macro picture of cannabis, they usually get excited. And then cannabis will create 1 million jobs and we're going to be the business that fills those jobs. So at this point in time, I can usually get people over the hump. But in the beginning, people were like, nah, like, let's see how it shakes out.
I read an interesting stat the other day. 29% of people who have not tried cannabis want to try it. And so House of Puff, we speak to the canna nervous, the canna newbies. Yeah. So it's just when you see these fascinating stats, women being the fastest growing segment, sales, quadrupling, every quarter, it's an exciting place, an exciting industry to be in.
Completely. And like, it's no surprise that there's a stigma around it. People grew up their entire lives being like, for us, like if we were like smoking weed, like you would be like grounded, right? Like, so it's like in your whole life you associate scared. And it wasn't even a thing with like drinking that like, oh, eventually you can do it. It was like, no, you can never smoke weed. It's literally illegal. People go to jail. So I get why that stigma exists, but I think it's so amazing to see it being broken down over time. And the reality is that cannabis is so much better for you than alcohol. So it's a fact.
Can you share like one, or a few tips that other cannabis entrepreneurs could use to normalize the industry to their skeptics? Because I still talk to people every day and they're like, really, you're in the cannabis industry? So what's your advice to, cannabis entrepreneurs like myself when we're having these conversations with sort of the naysayers?
I think killing people with stats, like exactly the stat that you just shared around. I actually haven't heard that one. That's amazing, right? The percentage of people that haven't tried cannabis actually want to try cannabis. Stats around health statistics, I feel, are always ones that can really, I think stats that people can relate to. And so, a lot of times once people have a personal experience, such as my grandmother had cancer and she used cannabis to relieve symptoms from chemotherapy. Like once people have one of these personal stories or connections, or my daughter was having a seizure and we put cannabis oil underneath her tongue and the seizures would stop and it was the only thing that would work. Like, I think once people hear literally a personal story, they realize this is worth trying and they hear it from a credible person. So like my kind of go-to is when people are skeptical about it, I try to find a couple of people in their network that have seen the light, and then those people can bring them over. Because at a certain point, like people need to hear it from people they know and love and trust, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we know you've been very busy. You popped over my LinkedIn, TechCrunch everywhere. Karson, thanks. Specifically around, your high grossing seed and Series A investment rounds. 19 million your Series A with some iconic. I'm a big, VC Silicon Valley nerd, so I love doing my research. I mean, Delta Emerald, love those guys, Lyra Hippo. So tell me about this journey and what you attribute, like how you got there. I mean, that's not a small chunk of change. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, so it was actually our Series B.
Series B. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we raised a little bit around the journey of VC.
Yeah.
We raised our $2.5 million seed round. And at the time that we raised the seed round, I legitimately didn't know what venture capital was. I didn't know a single venture capitalist. I'd just been running this business completely bootstrapped, thought that how you grew businesses was like make money and then take the money and use the money to invest in other things. So I had a friend named Ryan Smith, who is the founder of LeafLink. And Ryan Smith at the time had already raised his seed round and his Series A. And we were friends, and he was like, I don't understand why you're not raising capital. You could be growing so much quicker. You could build your tech so much faster. And you should talk to some investors. And so I started having meetings with some investors and just learning more about VC. I put a pitch deck together, which like I look back on and it was so bad. And was lucky enough to meet Lyra Hippo. They're based in New York, and they gave us a term sheet and they led our seed round, and they've been incredible partners. And we got really lucky. Like, I think there's great investors out there and not great investors out there. So the fact that we got them as our seed investors, like I have a very generally positive view on venture capital. And I think it's because we worked with amazing partners out of the gate. But that's when we raised our seed round. Then we raised our Series A, which Casa Verde, Snoop Dogg's fund, led the Series A. And then we raised our Series B, which Level One, again, a non-cannabis New York-based fund, led the Series B. And to the point that you just made, quite a few other inside cannabis investors and outside of cannabis investors participated. So we feel lucky to have a really solid cap table.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good cap table if I ever saw one. And going back to your, I remember my first pitch deck, and I thought, oh, well, fundraising will be so easy. I'll just make a pretty pitch deck, tell my story, problem solution. And looking back, I'm like, oh my God, I hope it never sees like the light of day. And even like lingo, right? Learning, like, I remember the first time I thought, I'm not going to bootstrap anymore. I'm going to go, for my seed round. And somebody was like, well, what's your valuation? And I did a valuation. I'm like,
yeah,
I think I'm priceless. Like, what do you mean my valuation?
Yeah.
The lingo is, so any advice to other, female founders trying to achieve the similar funding success you've had?
Yeah. So what I would say is definitely like the seed round is more about like the idea, the founder, the market, the team, early indicators. And so you don't need to, when you're going into the seed round, you're not going to be asked, you don't have a ton of customers. So it's like, you can make a financial model that can forecast out, here's what we think our customer acquisition cost is. Here's what we think our lifetime value is, right? You can kind of have these stats, but like literally those stats never came up for us during our seed round. And like, I wouldn't have known the answer. It was more around, this is the vision. This is who I am. This is the team I'm going to build. This is the market, like idea and a dream, hence seed. Series A is like, all right, we have some good early indicators that this is working. We're starting to, we have revenue. And again, this is for a tech business. I'm sure, I don't know much about like direct to consumer or anything else. This is just for tech businesses, but I think it's all kind of the same concept. We are going to put some fuel on the fire to see, we're going to really put some fuel on the fire to continue building out the product, continue building out the team, get more aggressive on sales and marketing. And then Series B, you need to like show that this thing can scale. Like, we have a proven way that when we when we put $1 in, we get $10 out, and here's how, right? And you need to really be able to, like, I found that Series B was the hardest round that we raised because it's much less about like the dream and it's more like the metrics and the data. Right. And I wish I would have done a better job for the years leading up to the Series B of like figuring out what are our core metrics and how are we going to track them and not pivot away from them. So my advice to founders would be like, literally take metrics and tracking so serious from day one, because it's so hard to like retroact. Like, we're trying to change things in Salesforce and have market specific data and customer specific data. And like, to do it when you're in the middle of it is such a nightmare. I wish I could go back to day one so bad. Everything would be so clean. Our metrics would be so clean. I would be able to run the business so much more easily. So that was my biggest thing I would give advice is like, metrics matter long-term, so start now.
That's really, really good advice. So you've spoken about how Vangst is not a carbon copy of other recruitment sites because it's tailored to the cannabis industry. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs about how to customize their ideas to be industry specific? And I think of like, there's so many nascent industries coming up, like industrial hemp, VR, AR, crypto. So advice on how people can customize their ideas to be industry specific.
And look, I'm biased because this is what we're working on, but I think industry specific is like the path forward. If you think about Craigslist, everyone used to go to Craigslist, right? Like, everyone used to go to Craigslist to find their apartments that they wanted to rent for the weekend. Now there's Airbnb, which is tailored specific to homeowners and potential renters matching. If you think about concert tickets, people literally used to go to Craigslist. Now you go to StubHub. If you think about jobs, people used to post their jobs on Craigslist. Now there's LinkedIn. So I think that's similar to how Craigslist sort of had a bunch of unicorn babies, is a way to think about it. LinkedIn will do the same. And same with Indeed, because it's frankly such a shit show. You go to LinkedIn and you have, if I go to my LinkedIn right now, I think I have like 16,000 connections. I maybe know 500 people, and I can't do any, and I want to, like you get all these people trying to sell you things, trying to, that are completely DMing you. They're not in this industry. And I post a job and I get people from completely the wrong background. There's no level of filter. And so just thinking about jobs specifically, there's a lot of industry specific talent marketplaces. So Trusted Health is for nursing. WorkRise is for oil and gas. Vangst is for cannabis. And so I see it happening across recruitment, but I know it's happening across other sectors as well, because people like live in the, I want this now. I want this tailored to me. I want this tailored to my industry. Like, I don't want to deal with, for our job, I don't want to get a bunch of people that work on an oil rig that don't have the right badge and everything else. Like, just give me people with a badge that are ready to go. I don't care how you get them to me. Just give me what I want right now. And I think we have to go verticalized. So my advice, so that just paints a sweeping kind of.
That was amazing. Yes, that was brilliant.
But my advice is like, really like know your industry so well and know what the pain points are. Like the reason why this is successful is because we know in Colorado, you have to have a med badge. And in order to get a med badge, you have to do 2 different sets of fingerprints and you have to do this application. And we figured out ways to help automate that to make it easier for the candidate and the customer. But like, if you're focused on every single industry, you're not going to really be able to get in there with the state of Colorado and figure out all the steps for getting a badge. And it is time consuming and you need to have someone focused on it, and it's constantly changing. So like, go deep and figure out what is like the problem. What is the friction? Remove the friction and make it easy for your industry, and try not to do so much. Like, one other thing that came up to us during the Series B, some funds told us that they weren't going to invest in banks because our total addressable market, our TAM, wasn't big enough. And they said, you need to go focus on other industries besides cannabis, which maybe we will eventually, but we have not nailed cannabis yet. And I think that I would rather find investors that believe like, hey, we can get from 20% market share to 80% market share if we remove all these friction points, rather than like, let's go try to like do staffing for bars or whatever. Right. So yeah, really be the expert and remove friction to summarize that.
I heard somebody say riches in niches or niches, right? And focusing on one, thing. So I'm here for it. So as you know, Latina, proud of it. Got to talk about, the history of criminalization of people of color with cannabis businesses. How can the industry open more doors to cannabis entrepreneurs of color? Let's talk about it.
I mean, look, I like what I mentioned earlier on, like this industry does have the chance to define from day one the businesses open up. Like we have the chance to define rather than disrupt. Like, I think it would be amazing if in 10 years time, people look back at the cannabis industry and can truly say that there's more women that work in this industry. There are more people of color that work in this industry. Like there's more folks from the LGBTQ community. Like we have the chance to build it however we want, but like talk is so cheap, and cannabis businesses legitimately need to say from day one, like these are the metrics that we're shooting for, and shoot for it and treat it like a KPI, like they would any other metric in their company. So like companies say, we want to hit $1 million a month, and then they work towards it. If you set a metric in place that we want 50% of our workforce to be women, and you work towards it, like it will literally happen, but you have to focus on it and work towards it. And that means that if you want to make this happen and you go to an interview and you have 5 white men, you're not getting women, you're not getting people of color, because you don't even have a candidate at the table. So people could go back and say, we're going to wait until we have a diverse set of candidates to move forward with the process. And I know this is something Power to Fly really focuses on and specializes in. But from my perspective, like set a goal and treat it like any other goal in your organization. And I think it gets like kicked down the road. It's like I see so many companies say they want to do it, but then they don't do it.
Right. And then, the stats, what I'm reading with, women in the C-suite, and then even the share of minorities in executive positions at cannabis companies has dropped significantly in 2021. I mean, what can we do as an industry to get more, females and people of color in the C-suite positions?
Yeah, again, I mean, like also like more, I think like we talk about VC, like women, I think, make up like 2% of the VC invested last year, right? And so
Yeah,
like,
and then women of color, it's even less than 2%. It's like, it's terrible.
yeah, I'm scared to even know what that stat is.
It's
right?
like 0.006 or something like really abysmal.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay, if the only people that are raising capital are like white men, and then they're hiring their buddies, like it kind of is a problem. So look, I mean, like, think about, like, we're speaking of really good VCs, like they're Hippo, like they have so many female founders, so many women of color in their portfolio, like that they're actually walking the talk of like doing this, but it starts out with like the capital and the people that are making the hires. Like if you're at your company, you're controlling the dollar and controlling who you're hiring. I guarantee you that when you guys are at 100 employees, you're going to have a extremely inclusive and diverse staff.
Yep.
Vangst, 66% of our team is females, because like I'm a woman, and obviously like I want to hire other women. So I literally think that like VCs need to do a better job of and not give like the entrepreneurs aren't out there, like they're literally out there. So they need to do a better job of finding them, because that the business owner is how the culture is going to trickle down.
Yep. Well, lastly, how can we follow you? How can we, keep in touch with Vangst? Give me all the handles, all the Twitters, everything.
Yes, that would be great. I'm trying to get my Twitter following up. It's been about the same for about 10 years. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, throw me a follow, K Humiston. On LinkedIn, Karson Humiston, Instagram, Karson Humiston, and then Vangst is at Vangst across all like the various channels. So would love to have people follow along.
Great. Well, I wish we had more time to talk, because I feel like this was just such a fruitful conversation for me. Thank you for your time. I'm so excited we finally got to connect.
We'll meet in person.
Yes, let's do it. Best of luck with Vangst. What you're doing is absolutely incredible. I can't wait to follow your journey.
Thank you. This was an amazing panel. You're an amazing moderator. So thanks to everyone for having us.